We are live as we travel the uphill road, coming to you from Black Bottom, #1 Detroit. We thank God that we have survived and now have arrived at the last stop. Living with reality, truth, and consequences. Exciting yet thoughtful conversations, monologue, dialogues, dynamic guests, interviews. Most importantly, you, the listening audience. Live chat. Soon coming will be live call-in as we grow. Here at the last stop, we follow proven mathematical steps to its logical, biological, natural, commonsensical conclusion. Like 1 + 1 = 2, right? We all run like that. So Dems, Repubs, Christians, Jews, Muslim, Hindu, and who do you do? Why must we compete when we all say that we believe in peace? In peace. In peace. In peace. Well, all right now, unbuckle your seatbelts. You have arrived at the last stop. I'm your host and conductor, Mansa Bey. Yes, right now I'm going to introduce you to the deep state operative that kind of, pulled in the black population into under the deep state's control or hypnosis. I'm going to introduce you to this man whom I know a lot of you really is endeared to you, but I consider him a traitor, not only to the country of America, but also to the black race as well. But I don't want to get off into a race thing. I just want to get into legal and lawful things. So here is this one who's seeking to continue the realm of the deep state into the future.
There are going to be times, potentially, when one side tries to stack the deck and lock in a permanent grip on power, either by actively suppressing votes or politicizing the armed forces or using the judiciary, the criminal justice system to go after opponents. And in those circumstances, pluralism does not call for us to just stand back and say, well, I'm not sure that's okay. In those circumstances, a line has been crossed, and we have to stand firm.
As I said just earlier, that I don't want to get off into the race thing. I want this to be legal, lawful, politically, I can say politically correct.
One thing to understand, as people who are flirting with the Trump administration or doing the bidding of the Trump administration or engaging in the pay-to-play schemes of the Trump administration, the statute of limitations is 5 years. Donald Trump and this toxic administration will be long gone, but there will still be accountability to be had. And that process, of course, begins now, but it will not be complete until perhaps there is an independent Department of Justice, certainly an independent House of Representatives in Democratic hands. The Department of Justice is one of the great institutions in law enforcement in the history of this country, and Donald Trump and these extremists have been destroying its integrity.
To me, they're criminals, warmongers, but again, this Barack Hussein Obama. There's a recording out where he said that the Africans, could not have or should not have air conditioning because the planet would boil over or something. Some nonsense like that. Like, what's his name said? Al Gore. He said that the oceans were going to boil over. Okay, that's as crazy as this one congressman saying that he thought that the island of, what is it? Was it not Guatemala, but one of the islands. Anyway, he thought that the island would tip over. Just ignorance and just people who have been put in positions to execute an agenda. 2030. Look that up. The 2030 agenda. World Economic Forum.
Here's a clip.
There are going to be times, potentially, when one side tries to stack the deck and lock in a permanent grip on power, either by actively suppressing votes or politicizing the armed forces or using the judiciary, the criminal justice system to go after opponents. And in those circumstances, pluralism does not call for us to just stand back and say, well, I'm not sure. That's okay. In those circumstances, a line has been crossed, and we have to stand firm.
James Comey has just been indicted on 2 counts, false statements and obstruction of justice. Fox News Justice correspondent David Spunt is here with all the latest details. David, what do we know so far?
Well, hey, Laura, we are trying to look at this paperwork here. We want to see the actual indictment. It's not been released yet or posted on the docket, but as you mentioned, false statement and obstruction of justice. This coming today from a grand jury of Virginia. This was presented by U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, the former personal attorney of President Trump, who's been on the job only since Monday. Imagine that as a first week. And we know now that there are 2 charges that have been handed up in this indictment against former FBI Director James Comey. We're waiting to see specifically what those entail. However, we're told that it relates to a September 30th 2020 testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Laura. And that date is very specific because this coming Tuesday is 5 years to the day after that testimony, and a statute of limitations for lying to Congress or lying to a federal official is exactly 5 years. So they got this in right under the deadline as we wait to look at this paperwork when it's out, and it could be out very soon. Laura.
David, thank you very much. Here to discuss criminal profiler James Gagliano, retired FBI supervisory special agent. Gentlemen, we're waiting to get the terms of this indictment specifically, but many of us expected this was coming. Perjury is not easy to prove. We also have information tonight that line prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia had written a declination memo, in other words, to the U.S. Attorney stating they could not find probable cause to indict Comey. Nevertheless, the U.S. Attorney, apparently with her own factual undertaking, decided to go ahead with this indictment. As we just heard, right within the 5-year statute of limitations on these particular statements made in this testimony. James, let's start with you. These cases, what do you see so far?
Director knows what to do and get people for him, but we're going to have people like McCabe and Strzok, whether they're going to be subpoenaed and they're going to be brought before a jury, and they have to testify, whether they're granted some kind of immunity. We'll see where that goes, because they don't want to get perjury charges either, and that would be going 5 years from now.
Well, here's a moment where Comey may have gotten himself into real hot water. Watch.
Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never. He then asked you, quote, have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration? You responded again under oath, no. Now, as you know, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave. I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
James Gagliano, what do you make of this? The posture of this case, again, the indictment itself has not been released. This narrative that the Democrats are clinging to, that this is the weaponization, rich coming from them, by the way, This is the weaponization, Trump's weaponization of the Justice Department against his political enemy. How do you see it?
Well, Laura, I don't think anybody's doing cartwheels in the FBI or in the retired FBI ranks. Obviously, this is a stain. Now, look, the FBI's been around for 117 years. James Comey was FBI director for 3 years and 247 days. He was fired May 9th, 2017, pleasure of the president, and I'm sorry, many of the things that James Comey did were wrong. There are 4 IG reports, and Laura, I'm wonky enough to have read every word of those 4 reports, and they were scathing. Maybe he didn't get indicted out of that, but as you pointed out, no one's above the law. And Laura, I'll leave you with this. There's a number of people that look at James Comey as the epitome of probity and moral rectitude. But there's also a lot of us that feel like a lot of this, as my colleague just mentioned, was preening and fluffing and trying to work on his legacy. Last thing, 2018, he shows up with Katie Couric at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Her last question to her is, what do you want your legacy to be? He says, I hope to be forgotten. Then book tours, 8647, and now a humiliating indictment.
And James Fitzgerald, I think we have to think about it this way too, regardless of how this all turns out. The director of the FBI helped spearhead one of the most damaging episodes of American criminal justice that we have ever seen. Injustice, I should say. Taking on seat a sitting president of the United States with these bogus BS cases that they tried to, gin up in the public's mind, affect public opinion, and ultimately hobble this president. That's at the bottom of what all went on here. And there were a lot of people involved, but he was at the top of the food chain here. Barack Obama was the other, but he was at the top of the food chain here. And I think that justice must be done, lest no one have faith in the FBI going forward. If nothing comes of everything that we know happened, then what are we?
Well, I'm retired FBI, and I certainly agree with that. I would be very much bothered if this wasn't taken to its logical conclusion. I'm going to go back to 2017, the Women's March in January of that year, right after Trump was inaugurated, or right around that time. I'll never forget Mrs. Comey and 2 of her daughters were interviewed by chance by CNN, directly identifying themselves who they were. Now, they have every right to do that, First Amendment, all that. But you really think the wife and daughters of the FBI would stay away from making controversial statements about the upcoming Trump administration? Well, we knew that was just one adjacent part of what their husband/father was doing. It was also crossfire hurricane going on inside the FBI, and we all know where that went, winding up with him possibly committing perjury in front of Congress.
Now, this was a long, winding setup of a duly elected president of the United States, and it was a travesty. And justice must be done. Panel, thank you very much. I want to bring in Brett Tolman, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Utah. Brett, we're just getting all these details now, and frankly, they're scant. We expect this indictment to be released at any moment. Your thoughts on where this case might go? And again, we know the backstory here, that the Democrats are going to claim, oh, it's just an indictment. They were never saying that when they indicted Trump, right? But now they're out saying, oh, it's just an indictment, it doesn't mean anything. Well, of course, you're presumed innocent. But nevertheless, former FBI director, looks like he was expecting this indictment and some of his comments recently. Your reaction tonight?
Well, as the Democrats told us, right? The grand jury decided this, and we should honor the grand jury's role, and we should give confidence to it. And here it is on the other side, and you're going to hear them cry, and they're going to lament that it's lawfare. But here's the progression of Jim Comey. I knew Jim Comey. I was an assistant U.S. attorney when he was the deputy director of the deputy director of the Department of Justice. and he wielded much power. He was a very different lawyer, a very different member of the Department of Justice back then, and I saw a progression that came as a result of his attention, his media, attention, his power and influence that he started to yield. We saw him lying, Laura, about whether there were abuses of the FISA Patriot Act, Rule 702. He was willing to lie about that. He's been telling lies, and he's been doing it continually because he has not been held accountable. He didn't have a DOJ that was willing to prosecute him or even legitimately investigate him for what he was doing. We know the history, but I will tell you this. These statutes are there for a reason, to especially give confidence that someone that's hauled in front of Congress is not lying while under oath, and someone is not interfering with the transcript.
Yes.
And to whom did you show copies?
I asked, President tweeted on Friday after I got fired that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
It's amazing to hear that all these years later. But explain to our viewers why that moment was so important. What did we learn about Jim Comey?
What we learned was he's willing to try to explain his manipulation, and he got caught. He knew he was going to be caught, that he had leaked information to the media, which is a violation of not just internal protocols, but can be criminal obstruction. And we later would find out that he would lie to Congress and to others about it, and about his role in actually trying to manipulate the media in a direction that he wanted that would go after President Trump. And Laura, remember, this is just obstruction, and it is lying to federal officials. Jim Comey has prosecuted and pushed through prosecution of other individuals very vigorously. So now we learn why he was backpedaling, why he was trying to explain his prior action.
Yeah, great point about Flynn. I mean, a lot of people describe that as total entrapment, a way to hobble Trump right off the bat. Flynn didn't have a lawyer with him. He was just, oh, sure, I'll talk to you. Remember, they sent the DOJ attorneys over to the White House and just, oh, sure, I have nothing to hide. And he starts talking to them. Next thing you know, they're off to the races against him. He's out. And that was the beginning of the real, their efforts, at least, to stymie and harm the Trump presidency. I think this goes right to the core, Brett, of the proper functioning of our federal government. They didn't like the fact that Donald Trump got elected. Yep. They hated the fact that the voters elected Trump. From Obama, playing loosey-goosey with that IC, recommendations about, they didn't find any Russia involvement, right? So he didn't like that. He didn't like what the intel community found. He told basically go back and do it over. And then Comey putting his finger on the state scale with the absurd situation with the Flynn investigation. And then, of course, moving on to Comey and the leak to his buddy. So none of this should surprise us all these years later, but it was an all-out effort to hobble, hurt, and derail a duly elected president of the United States. That's what happened.
A director of the FBI believed completely that he was not going to face any consequences because he hadn't previously in his career when he had done things that he shouldn't have done. So then as director, he felt emboldened. And what did he do? He did those things that he needed to do in order to try to put a bullseye on President Trump. If you ask Jim Comey, he'll tell you the smartest person in the room is Jim Comey. And he's built his career, a different trajectory in his career, thought he would end up being someone that we might be proud of instead of ashamed of. But that's where we're at with Jim Comey.
No, he was acting like he was president. I mean, he thought he was smarter than Trump, better than Trump. He looked down on Trump, literally and metaphorically. So he always had this imperious way about him. Being imperious is not a crime, obviously, but it was a tell about the kind of guy he was. Brett, thank you very much. Here with me now, Jonathan Fahey, former federal prosecutor. Jonathan.
Accused about an entire scheme as how they would prove the perjury and prove the obstruction of justice. So I'll be interested to see if they do that and how they lay that out. But I think your point, sort of your broad point you were just making about everyone treated Trump and everyone in the Trump world as sort of beneath contempt, and different rules always apply to them. With, you know, Michael Flynn, and you think of Peter Navarro, you think of Steve Bannon, these people that were, you know, they went to prison for basically, you know, conduct. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they laid it out, what the actual allegations are, because perjury, as you know, is a very hard, in many ways, a hard thing to prove, because when you have to prove there's a statement that is false, and the person knew that it was false. So those tend to be a little bit tricky, and there's multiple ways to defend them. That's why it's not charged that often. So I'll be interested in sort of determining or seeing what the evidence it is that the statements he made were false and how he knew that they were false. But this is really going to be, I think, sort of, it's a bombshell in many ways, because the people that will ultimately be testifying if this does go to trial is going to be a lot of these same players from, you know, the Crossfire Hurricane days. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and whether or not other people have exposure within this as well.
Well, I think all the lawyers who were demanding Donald Trump's head on a platter, both in these the federal witch hunts and the state cases, you're going to see them swivel. Their heads are going to swivel, and they're going to suddenly be saying, this is weaponization. Donald Trump's payback time for his political enemies. That's what they're going to say. They're already saying it on the other cable networks tonight. And to that, you respond?
Yeah, I would love to just hear somebody from the Democratic Party acknowledge that there was some weaponization of the last DOJ. I mean, it's so out of bounds, the things they did, not just with Trump, but Trump supporters, people going to school board meetings and want to talk, and the cases against Trump. Putting aside the fact he got elected president, all of those cases were collapsing under their own weight. And that joke of a case that Alvin Bragg prosecuted that convicted Trump, everyone knows that case was going to go down on appeal. So, yeah, these people acting like, oh, a grand jury indicted Trump, so he was presumptively guilty. And now they're going to have a different view. And maybe they should at least take a moment to reflect on how they treated Trump. And not only Trump, but everyone around him was treated like they were beneath contempt because they were not part of the establishment. So they didn't deserve to be treated the way that everyone else did.
Oh, well, we will see what's in this indictment. Jonathan, thank you very much. Wait, the details of the indictment itself on James Comey.
So Dems, Republicans, Christians, Jews, Muslim, Hindu, and who do you do? Why must we compete when we all say that we believe in peace? In peace. In peace. In peace.
Well, all right now, unbuckle your seatbelts. You have arrived at the last stop. I'm your host and conductor, Mansa Bay.